On this short lesson, I want to try to translate a very unusual verse in the book of Mishlei, the book of Proverbs, and in particular stress the Aramaic translation and its relationship to what is called Peshitta, a known Syriac translation about which I will talk in a moment. The verse I'm talking about, in my opinion, it's the hardest verse in the entire book of Mishlei and possibly in the whole Bible and the whole Tanakh, the hardest verse to translate. And about this verse, virtually every word almost has different possibilities what it means. And that is from the verse 26th chapter, 10th verse of the book. Rav Meholel kol, Socher kisil, Socher Ovrim. What can this verse possibly mean? So the first word Rav can mean something like great or a lot or a master, but it could also come from the word similar to riv, and that is quarrel, the root, the meaning quarrel. And also this word can sometimes mean an archer. Of course, if the word means master, then it's possible it's talking about Hashem. But that's just one of the possible interpretations. Next, the word Meholel, the one who makes, or possibly the one who wounds. Socher usually means somebody who hires, but it could also mean something like corking, stopping the water from flowing. And at last, the word Ovrim here can mean passersby, people who just walk by, or transgressors, Ovrim al mitzvot. So what are some of the possible translations? Based on all these ambiguities, there could be probably a few dozen translations, but I will bring some of the more common ones. Okay, so if Rav means Hashem here, so Hashem, who creates everything, hires or rewards, that's actually two different possibilities, fools and transgressors, or passersby. Now, what this could mean is a different story. I'm only trying to say what the words should be translated as, possibly, but the meaning could also be, there could be a few different possibilities of what each of these translations could mean. That Hashem uses sometimes just random passersby, or sometimes rewards transgressors. Very weird verse. Not clear exactly what it's teaching. Okay, second possibility, that it's not talking about Hashem, it's just a regular master, some kind of master. Performs all things, but the one who hires a fool is like hiring a random passerby. Okay, so that at least we can understand the simple meaning of this verse, if this is the correct translation. And that is that if you're gonna hire if you're gonna hire a fool, it's like hiring a random passerby. Another possibility, although quarrelsome men, right, that's already from the word riv, right? Rav here means quarrelsome according to this translation. Although a quarrelsome man damages everything, he hires fools and transgressors. Maybe it means only fools and transgressors benefit from his actions. Right? He hires, or the people are benefiting from. Two different possibilities again. And at last, if this word Rav here means an archer, so then the meaning of the verse could be like an archer who wounds everyone at random, so is the one who hires a fool or hires a passerby. Now the truth is, a lot of verses in the book of Mishlei are based on a concept A like B, meaning the more obvious case is shown to be similar to the less obvious, meaning you could learn the less obvious from the more obvious. Like the one who holds a dog by her ears is the one who mixes in to the quarrel that he has no shaychus to, he has nothing to do with, meaning don't try to enter the quarrel, because what will happen is you'll be stuck. Just like if you hold a dog with its ears, It's going to bite you eventually. You can't hold it forever. So too, if you see two people quarreling, you try to put in 5 cents of yours, and in the end they'll both hate you. So don't try to enter the quarrel that doesn't apply to you at all. Something like that. So the more obvious cases can compare to the less obvious. Sometimes the comparison is not obvious at all, but at least it's possible that that's the meaning. For example, the one is like a moshel, a parable in the mouth of a fool is similar to the one who is a drunkard who picked up a thorn, meaning just like randomly a drunkard, when he's crawling on the floor and he can be wounded by a thorn, so too a person who is a fool, even if he says something that seems to be wise, like a good mashal, a good parable, a proverb, that's just random, just like a drunkard who accidentally picked up a thorn. Maybe that's the meaning of the verse. But anyway, there are a lot of verses where it's comparing one half to the other half. So according to the last interpretation, it's trying to say that that the second half is similar to the first, just like an archer who is wounding everyone at random. So too, a person who tries to hire a fool or a random passerby is basically gonna just get damage his property or whatever else he's trying to get his worker to do. Don't hire fools, don't hire passerbys. Okay, the next possibility. Again, it's going according to the opinion that Rav is master here. So the master performs all things, but he that stops a fool is like the one who is trying to stop a flood. Right? Like I said, that the word Socher could mean stopping some water from flowing, corking. So according to this, it's trying to say that stopping a fool is like stopping a flood. Impossible. So the interesting part of all of this is the Aramaic translation. Now we have, of course, Aramaic was always a Jewish kind of language in the sense that it became, after the Babylonian exile, and much later when already a lot of Jews lived in the land of Israel, still they spoke Aramaic, but there were different dialects. There's something called Syriac, which is, they call, I think, Middle Aramaic. It's a type of Aramaic. But all of these languages are related, similar enough to each other, and they became the most important language after Hebrew in Judaism. Even some books of the Bible are written partially in Aramaic, the book of Ezra and the book of Daniel. And of course, the Talmud, both Babylonian and Jerusalem Talmud. So it's definitely a very important language for us. And almost all of the Bible was translated into Aramaic and various dialects of it, and it's printed together with our editions of the Mikraot Gedolot, what's called the main commentaries of the Bible. They always use Aramaic. But the Aramaic translations of different parts of the Bible did not fare equally and weren't composed by equally known and highly esteemed authorities. That is, the translation of the Chumash, the 5 books of Moshe, that translation is very important, and many Orthodox Jews read it every week together with the Hebrew. Twice the Hebrew and once the Aramaic translation. And Rashi, of course, and all the commentaries use it all the time. We call it Targum unclear. There was a certain, by the way, convert to Judaism who composed this translation, or it's based on his work anyway. Then there is the Targum of Nevi'im, the second part of the Bible, what's called prophets. And that Targum is attributed to Jonathan ben Uziel. Although there is some uncertainty if the Targum, if that translation that we have in our hands is actually his, but in any case, that's a very important translation. Also, it's also used by all the commentaries, including Rashi, and it was actually composed even earlier than Onkelos. Jonathan ben Uziel lived he was a student of Hillel, so he lived in the times of the temple. And at last, there are some books of Ketuvim, not all, that also have Aramaic translations. And those ones were not composed by anybody of great authority, or at least we don't know who composed what. Sometimes it's printed in our editions as Targum of Rav Yosef. There was a blind scholar in the times of the Talmud named Rav Yosef, and he did do some translations, but it's not clear at all that our translation of Ketuvim has anything to do with his translations. At any rate, Ktuvim, the third part of our Bible, of the Hebrew Bible, of Tanakh, that part only has less authoritative translations. They are almost never used. Rashi never quotes these Targumim. But at any rate, they are important Targumim in some sense, and sometimes they're used to understand the meaning of the text. But there are cases when their translations seem to contradict our Masoretic text, and this seems to be one of them. In the case of Targum Yonatan, it's much less common. But the second part of the verse is actually translated as if the words are split somewhat differently. Let me read what I think is the correct translation from Aramaic to English of this translation that we have. Many are the pains or the suffering, I guess, of the flesh of a fool, but a drunkard can cross the sea, thinks that he can even cross the sea. Nothing scares him. So let's first discuss the second part of the verse. What exactly is he translating? Right? We have, as I just mentioned in our verse, Socher Ovrim. He hires passersby. But apparently the translator had the same consonants but different split and different vowels, and that is Shechor over Yam. A drunkard can cross the sea, crosses the sea. So instead of Ovrim, it's two words, over Yam. And instead of Socher, it's Shechor. Now, the first part of the verse is even more difficult. And there are various possibilities what the translator had in front of him, and whether it might be a drush. But what I found really interesting is that there is this Aramaic translation, a Syriac translation, that did not get preserved by the Jewish people and was preserved by the Eastern Christian churches. But it was done by a Jew. It's almost certain that the translation was not done by a Christian. It was done by a Jew. And this Syriac translation, they call it Peshitta, from the word pashut, meaning it's very simple. It's the simplest word-to-word translation, basically. It's interesting that it's written in Syriac letters, so you have to learn the Syriac alphabet to understand it. But it's relatively easy. It's one-to-one correspondence. We use Hebrew letters. They use their alphabet. But the correspondence is one-to-one as opposed to Arabic. There are certain letters in Arabic that don't exist in Hebrew at all. But in Syriac, everything is perfect correspondence. And when I looked up on the internet which letters correspond to what Hebrew letters, I was able to translate those letters into Hebrew and our Aramaic, our script of Aramaic, and I saw that it's almost an identical translation to Peshitta. So I wonder what other cases there are like that. Somebody who is a great expert in this might want to study the issue, to what extent Peshitta corresponds to our Aramaic translation of the Sefer Mishlei. I did look up a few other obscure verses where the translation is not exactly corresponding to the simple meaning of what we usually see in the commentators. And in some cases there was a match, in some cases there was not. In the case of the book of Tehillim, of Psalms, there were more mismatches between Peshitta and our Aramaic translation. But it's an interesting point that there seems to have been some similarity, at least, in some common tradition between what is printed as our Aramaic translation and our standard editions of the Bible in the Ktuvim, at least in Sefer Mishlei, and what is preserved as Peshitta by the non-Jews. And on this I will end for now, and I hope there is at least some interesting idea that was presented on this short lesson.